As Asia reshapes the global landscape, the EU stands at a crossroad with the United States and China leading the charge. So Europe must decide to remain reactive or define a bold, human-centered vision for AI, one rooted in democratic values and social trust. My name is Kiorri, and this is Communicating Democracy, the EuroPCom podcast on public communication. And in this episode, we're joined by someone who knows this topic inside out, Reema Patel. So we asked Reema, how can the EU find its voice and its power in the global AI race? And what will it take to ensure that data and AI truly serve the public good and strengthen social fairness? Reema, you wear many hats. You're a researcher, facilitator, and convener with expertise in deliberative and participatory approaches, as well as international project manager. You're also the founder of Elgon Social. Currently, you work on the Digital Good Network and Public Voices in AI, and you direct the Global Citizen Assembly. So, with all that, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So, let's just start. Can the EU chart a course that puts people, not just profits or power, at the heart of AI?
People at the heart of AI is a really tricky one, just to say, because of the nature of AI technology itself. Mm-hmm. I like to sort of think about AI technologies as quite black box, at least in the way they are currently designed. So they are data-driven technologies, but we don't often know enough about them. And that already puts us at a really difficult starting place when it comes to our relationship with AI technology. And yet they seem to be shaping every aspect of our lives, from all aspects of decision-making about our healthcare, our finance, the way we're even doing things like warfare and defense at the moment, and all the way through to our interaction with digital technologies in the education sector. So one of the big challenges here is not so much that we can't do it, but that it's really imperative that developers understand how important it is to start opening up these technologies, so that there is increased understanding of and public trust and confidence in them if they are to work for us all. And surely that is the point of technology. I mean, technology should be about advancing human society and human goals.
So how do we put people at the heart of technology then?
Well, there's a few different ways, but the methodology of participatory and deliberative processes allows that dialogue to happen between the people who are using and deploying the technology and the people who are affected by them. So, for instance, citizen juries, citizen assemblies are very well known by now, participatory processes, but there are also other more creative methods, such as legislative theatre and forum theatre. There's ways we can engage people in the future of AI by using AI tools and technologies to speculate about what a world with biometrics might look like. I saw a really great exhibition in Turin many years ago on facial recognition technology. Some of these are really good examples for how we can take a more human-centered approach. But also, there is an important question which is about the different types of AI technologies. Firstly, the discussion that we need to have about which ones we want and which ones we don't want, and the boundaries and the scope and the application of the AI technology. How far do we want AI technologies to shape our society? Then secondly, there's a question about tensions and trade-offs with other values that we might want to prioritize, and some of the more traditional European values are around privacy or human rights or environmental safeguards and goals are also really important to think about. And then thirdly, the actual process of developing the technology, there's scope to involve people in this shaping the development of the technology, as well as assessing the impact that the technologies are having and providing advice and guidance on the impact of those technologies. So there's quite a few different ways that people can be involved.
Now, where does the EU hold a unique advantage in AI development and governance?
The European Union has two really strong features that go for it. Firstly, the block of member states. So in AI, the ability to govern and access and manage and use larger data sets has great traction, and as a result, the EU's approach to governance over many data sets across many member states is more likely to exert influence over the practices and the behaviours of technology organisations than individual member states, just because of the nature of AI technologies as reliant upon large quantities of data. So it's bigger, and that means it has an advantage over say smaller states, which would struggle to hold to account very powerful big tech actors. The other is around its history of practice around governance and regulation. So the GDPR was and still is a landmark piece of data protection legislation. And that means that it is very much on the front foot when it comes to thinking about AI governance and regulation. And more recently, through the European AI Act, there is a very thoughtful approach to the governance of the use and implementation of what is called high-risk AI, which is being proposed. So the idea here is that the classification of the likeliness of the AI tool to have high levels of risk for people in society generate further obligations for technology developers. So there's still kind of aspects of the implementation that are being developed, but these are the two sort of key contributions that the European Union both can and has made to the landscape so far.
And you mentioned earlier some European values like privacy, transparency, and equity shape global AI norms. What role can the public sector play in making that happen?
So the public sector plays mostly, I think, an implementation role, but also a standard setting and guidance role. So in the form of implementation, the public sector is itself often a user and commissioner of AI technology, and public services themselves are high-risk settings in many instances. So I give you examples of the use of AI to make decisions about healthcare and access to healthcare resource. That's a high-risk setting. Who should get what care and when and on what terms is a really controversial and challenging set of decisions that public servants have to make. Decisions about asylum and immigration. We have seen a lot of AI being used in this context. What other decisions? So decisions about exam results. I think there have been some interesting cases where AI has been used to predict exam result outcomes, especially during the pandemic. So in even the implementation question, public sector organisations have a really important role to play.
And as AI becomes part of everyday life, how can we make sure it is safe? Or maybe even how can we govern it?
Then we have regulators and we have governors of AI technology. So parts of the public sector specifically responsible for governing AI technology, but also parts of the public sector specifically responsible for consumer rights or standards or the regulation of high-risk industries such as finance and health. And these regulators, I think, are beginning to realise how important it is that they regulate AI as an extension of their work on consumer protection or health or finance. So, for instance, in the open banking world, AI and fintech is a very kind of live and relevant conversation for finance regulators. If we sort of see some of the conversation about cryptocurrency again, there's a sort of a dynamic there which is really interesting between regulators and emerging technologies. And in this role, it's a very interesting role because, for instance, many expectations around how people should use or deploy or develop AI are not really set yet. So the role of these organizations is to provide more guidance, is to provide more certainty about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. One of the big challenges is that regulators, especially sector-specific regulators, have been reluctant to step into that role, and they lack often teeth and the ability to enforce, and they lack resources and funding. So these are all kind of continual issues.
And on that, can Europe leverage its research institutions, talent networks, and public investment to lead in responsible AI innovation?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is happening to a certain extent already. So more and more organizations are recognizing the need to build broad coalitions of practice and responsible innovation here. I'm based in the UK, and we have an initiative called Responsible AI UK, which is part of research funding that comes from the UK government, which is supporting a wide network of researchers and academics and innovators to explore different parts of responsible AI. As part of that, I led the Public Voices in AI research program, which was itself a consortium of many researchers, including the Ada Lovelace Institute, the Alan Turing Institute, UCL, Sheffield University, Migrants' Rights Network, a Workers' Observatory, and so on. And so there are these methods or mechanisms that enable organizations to think about what responsible AI looks like. The main question is, how do we move beyond researching and thinking about what responsible AI looks like into influencing changes in policy, practice, and legislation? Again, here I feel the European Union has quite an influential role to play. Of course, you can shape how the deployment of AI at a national level. So it's not that there aren't responsibilities or things that national and local bodies can do, but compared to a body like the European Union, its ability to affect widespread systems change is quite limited.
Now, in the wake of generative AI, Europe faces a profound societal choice: how to harness the transformative power of AI, not just in economic gain, but for equity, inclusion, and social justice. So, how can we develop a vision that puts people first, balances innovation with protection, and ensures accountability at every stage?
So this accountability point is really interesting because I mentioned the black box nature of these systems. The very first obvious thing is to make them less black box, to create what I'd like to call a glass box approach to AI. So here, in this sort of glass box approach to AI, we are much more transparent about the system. But we cannot just leave it at that. We need to actually sort of develop these mechanisms that mean that people can challenge a proposal or a prediction or a recommendation. We have a very live debate about things like copyright, so identifying actually the sources of what is underpinning the basis of generative AI. This is also an argument for a glass box approach, because if we don't understand whose data has informed or shaped something that is creating value in the world, then we cannot really ensure justice and fairness in who we give that value to. So there is a really interesting question here about, no, really, do we want a very just or fair world? Because, justice and fairness would mean that if someone's creative artwork has created more creative artwork, that is reflected in the legislation or the governance of the intellectual property rights law and so on. And at the moment, we just do not have that systematic framework for thinking about things like that. So I think we're a bit of a long way behind when it comes to Gen AI in particular in thinking about justice and fairness. So that's just a really simple example. We've had a really kind of live debate and discussion in lots of different countries and contexts and member states about, the work of creative and their right. Considering how influential many music artists, for instance, are, I can only see it being a matter of time until there is some major landmark European piece of legislation that will need to be debated in a court, because it seems like a very obvious point of friction there.
Right. And speaking of fairness, how can we ensure structural fairness in data and algorithms? And can we develop robust frameworks for data governance, inclusive data sets, and mandatory bias testing and mitigation techniques in high impact AI systems?
Yeah. So structural fairness in AI governance, I kind of like to think of it at three levels. So the data sets shaping the AI system, then the design of the AI system itself, and then the sort of society in which the AI, or the context or the environment in which the AI system is developed. And these three levels or layers often bring different implications for structural inequalities or fairness. So at the data set level, often the data itself may have within it structural unfairness because of the type of data set. The example I like to give often is loan history data in the US, where many people made very discriminatory decisions about who to award loans to in a context that was very racially segregated or divided. So a fintech app that uses decisions about how loans have been awarded in the past may well reinforce biases in previous data sets. That's just one good example. But there's other problems, such as things like missing data. So the absence of important data about people who experience marginalization and minoritization, because we just simply have not the capacity or the ability to collect that data, or over surveillance on the other side. So we see this a lot in the biometric space, that we have more kind of facial images of certain people than others, mostly people who are from black and minority ethnic backgrounds, and also mostly people in low income neighborhoods and areas, because they tend to be more over surveilled. So this, even at the level of the data, we have more or less an issues with missing data. Then at the level of the tool and the technology itself, it's rare that tools and technologies are designed explicitly to address discrimination and bias, and often what you find is that the developers themselves have these blind spots, that they are not aware of adverse impacts and risks on people. So at this level, we see a really interesting challenge, which is that the tools and the technologies are designed for other goals, such as maximizing attention span for profit maximization, and therefore the other risks basically overlooked. So we see this a lot in the social media platforms, for instance, because of the sort of tendency to prioritize shorter format content or the virality of content. Platforms and tools online serve majority groups far more than they serve minority groups, and sometimes reinforce biases or inequity, and do not do much to stop that. And AI chatbots that learn off racial racial microaggressions, and are trained off really problematic statements that people are making, are a really good example of this. Then we have society as a whole. So here, I think, is where actually these issues are become quite interesting. Really the AI technologies, as I gave in the loan history data set example, they mirror the inequalities that exist in our society as a whole. And so here we know that we have a problem with our loan history data set, and we could then implement or redeploy a fintech app trained on this in the real world, and it would make all these biased decisions awarding very problematic loan history, and then these decisions would then feed back into the app, and then will continue to reinforce the inequalities that began at the data-wide level. And so what's interesting is the sort of how AI structures inequalities itself, but then is also trained on the decisions that continue to structure the inequalities. And it's quite, the risks therefore are quite significant when it comes to bias and inequalities. And many of these risks emerge not purely within the domain of the sort of development, but also its implementation, its use, and its continual use in the real world. So one of the big differences between most technologies and AI technologies is the way that they are shaped by us and our interactions with them when they are out into the real world. So I use something like ChatGPT as a really good example that, you can basically sit there and train ChatGPT to tell you the things you want it to tell you. And that is really tricky and challenging for even the developers of the AI technology. And so we can see where there's massive potential for structural inequalities and bias and discrimination and hallucination as well. All of these quite challenging phenomena to emerge in the context of these types of technologies.
So the question of whether Europe can find its own voice in a polarized tech world and communicate it is a complex and multifaceted one. And as we just saw, Europe has a unique set of strengths and weaknesses that will shape its approach to AI leadership. Well, there are challenges to be addressed as well, but there are also opportunities for Europe to take a lead in the development of trustworthy systems. This is a podcast series of the European Committee of the Regions. For more information on EuroPCom, please visit the website co.europa.eu.